Hi everyone, my name is Zach Rauheiveld. I'm the exhibits manager here at Vesterheim, and we are coming to you virtually because the museum is closed. Unfortunately, that means that we can't end the tattoo exhibit the way that we were hoping to. So while normally we would have a big sort of celebration, a big party to kind of bring the exhibit to a close, with the pandemic, we are unable to do that this year. So we're trying to find a few ways to celebrate this exhibit and to share it with you if you haven't had a chance to come down to the museum to see it. As soon as this intro is done, we're going to go back over to a live Facebook gallery talk that I gave last fall that goes through the entire exhibit. So if you haven't had a chance to come and see the exhibit in person, that will be your best chance to do it. We also wanted to take this time to, again, thank our sponsors, Nick and Courtney Rowley, and the Toppling Goliath Brewing Company and Brock's Valhalla Tattoo for their incredible support of this amazing project. While this exhibit will not reopen at Vesterheim, we are working on plans to take it on the road. So hopefully those will come into a little bit more clarity starting in 2021 and 2022. So again, thanks so much to our sponsors. Thanks for everybody who's social distancing and keeping themselves and their community safe. We look forward to inviting you back to the museum when it's safe to do so. But until then, sit back, relax. We've got about a 43-minute gallery talk where we go through the entire tattoo exhibit and see some people getting tattooed as well. So thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Hi everybody, thanks for joining us on Facebook Live this morning. My name is Zach Rauheiveld. I'm the exhibits manager here at Vesterheim, and we are going to take a tour of our tattoo exhibit. We thought this would be a great opportunity to invite some of our social media friends to the museum and give you guys a chance to see this exhibit if you haven't been able to make it down to the museum yet. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about the exhibit itself, give some people some time to join us here on this Facebook feed. First off, we want to thank our sponsors, Nick and Courtney Rowley. Without their generous support, we wouldn't be able to tell the story of tattooing sort of through time and across the world. So we're really thankful for Nick and Courtney's support. We're really thankful for the support of Toppling Goliath Brewing Company and Brock's Valhalla Tattoo. Again, sort of without their support, we wouldn't be able to tell these stories. So again, this is the Tattoo Identity Through Ink exhibit. My name is Zach Rauheiveld. I'm the exhibits manager here at Vesterheim, and we're going to do a Facebook Live tour of this space. So a lot of people are wondering why tattoos. Well, it's really an opportunity to explore a lot of different things that we're interested in the museum. We can talk about identity, because tattoos are sort of intimately tied to people's identity. They are for indigenous groups, they are ways that through tattoos you become part of that community. For people, it's a way to sort of identify themselves as sometimes separate from larger cultures. If you have a tattoo, you are now different than the people around you. But tattoos are so ubiquitous today that it's almost a way to be part of an in-group as well for those of you that have tattoos. Something like 1 in 3 Americans today have a tattoo, and that's true of our audience. We did some surveys of our visitors, and about 28% of our visitors have tattoos. So if you don't have one, you probably know many people that do. So the story of the tattoo exhibit starts about 5,000 years ago. With an Iceman who was found in the Italian Alps called Ötzi, and they call him Ötzi because that was sort of the region that he was found in Italy. And he was a 5,000-year-old person who was trapped in a glacier and was discovered, I think, in the early 90s. And he had 61 tattoos all over his body. So in Europe, tattooing has 5,000 years of history. And almost every indigenous culture across the globe has some history of doing tattoos or body modification. So that's really where our story starts. In this exhibit, we have lots of photos, we have lots of text panels, we have examples of sort of tattooed I suppose I shouldn't use finger quotes. These are actually tattooed silicone arms that were done by artists in Europe for us. So the history of tattooing in the world is really, it's an ancient thing. We've been modifying our bodies through tattoos and piercings and other sort of body modification rituals for thousands of years. We kind of maybe think about tattooing today being a really kind of, it's something that lots of people are doing right now, but there's a long span of history there. So that's really what we talk about. We talk about why indigenous people have tattoos, why they started to get tattoos, and kind of the rituals that would go along with those tattoo practices. For many indigenous groups, especially sort of in Southeast Asia, there was lots of rituals that would go along with getting a tattoo. They were seen as really powerful moments where the needle or the bone or the thorn, whatever they were using to sort of get that tattoo into the skin, that was a powerful moment. It would release endorphins, and there was blood involved, and all sorts of other things that sort of made that an incredibly meaningful, incredibly important part of becoming a member of that community. So we start kind of in the ancient world. We have photos of Egyptian tattoos. This is Otzi the Iceman. So you can see all of these little spots on the photo where the tattoos actually were on his body. And the interesting thing is that Otzi was sort of racked by arthritis, and his tattoos correspond to traditional acupuncture points on his body for treating arthritis. So there's some evidence to suggest, or some scholars believe that in the ancient world, tattooing was a form of medicine. It was a way to sort of help relieve some of these ailments that people would have. So these tattoo practices went uninterrupted in lots of these cultures for thousands of years. And it was largely when European explorers, colonialists, missionaries came through that really those practices started to change a little bit. So these traditional indigenous kind of regions or tattoo practices really give us our sources of tattoo styles today. So there's all kinds of different styles of tattoos, but many of them can be traced back to sort of large kind of time periods of tattoo history. So in Japan they have a history of tattooing that goes back a couple of hundred years, and so the sort of large-scale Japanese traditional style of tattoo largely came about as a result of a woodblock printer who was telling stories of outlaws and had sort of decorated them with huge tattoos. So because of that, in Japan, those tattoo styles really kind of were associated with a criminal element. In America, we have American traditional, which is like lots of really dark line work and some shading and banners and things like that we associate with lots of, kind of early 20th century tattoos, often on soldiers and GIs in World War I and World War II. There's also a huge tradition of tattooing in Southeast Asia. So when we think of tribal tattoos, often that's sort of what we're thinking about. In Thailand, there's a photo of a man with very traditional Thai tattoos. It's called Sakyan, which is a sacred or magical design. And they believe that these tattoos actually provided some magical sort of powers and responses for whoever was wearing those tattoos. A particular design could make you impervious to bullets or impervious to knives and things like that. So lots of what we see today in terms of tattoos are really coming out of these really long traditions of tattoo practices. So, we see a lot of tattoo styles getting mixed today, but historically they were pretty geographically separated and separated in time as well. So for indigenous people, lots of these tattoos were critical for becoming a part of their community. They were often done during coming of age rituals and ceremonies, and so you were sort of not seen as being part of the community or being a fully formed person until you received your tattoos. Often these rituals involved a village elder, and the tattoo artist in those communities were kind of revered for their ability, both artistic and otherwise. But also they sort of believed that these tattoos kind of had magical powers. So here's a photo of a Cayenne woman living in Borneo who has these really intricate tattoos on her hands. And at death, the Cayenne believed that a woman's tattoos burn like a torch to guide them through the darkness of the afterlife to the villages of their beloved ancestors. So these tattoos aren't just sort of ways to beautify the body. They're also incredibly meaningful in terms of their religious beliefs or their sort of cosmology. So this is true for lots of indigenous communities. Obviously the reasons and the narratives change, but sort of the large concepts of identity and of meaning and of community are threads that exist throughout indigenous practices. We have some tools that are used by indigenous tattoo communities. So lots of these practices involve using things like hand tools. So there's not much mechanized in these tattoo practices. So they would take, here's some replicas of a Cayenne hand tapping tattoo kit. So they would, they have these sort of tattoo tools that have sculptures or designs on the top of them that they believe have sort of magic or powerful spirits that help protect the person who's getting the tattoo during the process. And so the tattoo artist would, with the help of an assistant who would stretch the skin, the tattoo artist would dip the end of the needle into some ink. You can see sort of a pigment dish here. They would dip that into the ink and then take holding the tattoo tool in one hand and kind of a baton almost, or another stick in their other hand. They would rhythmically tap that tattoo design into the skin. Here's another one that uses a citrus thorn. So there's lots of different ways that people are using tools to sort of create these tattoos. The pigments that were used were often made from natural ingredients. So you would have like charcoal or soot or other things that would get mixed sometimes with urine or other liquids in order to make that tattoo ink. So that was also a really important part of the ritual and a really important part of the process. Was that you'd be able to sort of take these elements of the forest and take these elements of other natural elements and sort of get them into your skin. So if you're just joining us, my name is Zach Rauh-Heiveld. We are on a Facebook Live tour of the Tattoo Identity Through Ink exhibit at Vesterheim. So thank you so much for joining us. Today's a kind of an exciting day for the tattoo exhibit. We are doing live tattooing in the gallery. So we'll get to that in a little bit. So if you hear some background noise, it's our folks getting tattooed by one of our local tattoo artists. Keep an eye on our Facebook pages and our Instagram accounts, things like that, for opportunities to get tattooed in the gallery again. It's been incredibly popular. We've had, I think, our allotted time slots filled up in about 15 minutes this morning. So it's proven to be incredibly popular. So we've talked a little bit about the indigenous history of tattoo practices. But one of the critical parts of the story of the global history of tattooing is the collision sort of between Europe and European colonialists and missionaries and indigenous tattoo artists and tattoo traditions. So Europe has a history of tattooing that sort of, obviously the Iceman was 5,000 years ago. So you would think that there was a continuous tradition of tattooing in Europe. But it's actually, we don't actually know that Europeans had a tattooing tradition for that long. So in this section over here, we sort of talk about the history of tattooing in Europe. There was some evidence or some suspicion that the Picts, who were kind of the indigenous people of the British Isles, had tattoos. They were described by Roman Roman sort of historians and authors as kind of being covered in tattoo designs and things like that. But so there are some familiar images maybe to people as they think about the Picts. So this is one example. This was it's called a Pictish warrior by John White. And here's another sort of historical illustration of a Pict. Now the thing is, though, that these paintings and these designs, these drawings, were made centuries after the Picts sort of stopped being. They sort of stopped being. They became sort of the Scottish and English people as a result of kind of Roman occupation. And so these really are not representative of what those tattoo designs would have been. So for example, on this woman, a young daughter of the Pict, one clue that this is not painted from sort of historic record is that a lot of the botanical designs are from the New World. So the Picts of the sort of early first and second centuries obviously would not have floral designs from North America or South America. Scholars suspect that one of the reasons why these Picts are depicted in this way was sort of to draw immediate conclusions between sort of the savagery or so of these indigenous people and their kind of more civilized or Christian European counterparts. Because around the time that these paintings were made, so this one was about 1585, and this one again was about 1585 as well, you have European explorers who are setting off and traveling around the world, and they are encountering indigenous people who have tattoos. And so there's sort of a way to draw immediate sort of distinctions between these historic indigenous groups in Europe and the more civilized, and I'm using finger quotes there, European kind of Christianized Europeans of the time. So it was a way to sort of differentiate themselves from these indigenous people that they were encountering in Tahiti and in South America and in all of these other places. So it's a kind of a dark time period for indigenous people. It's not kind of, it's an incredibly dark time period for indigenous people, because these explorers would kidnap indigenous folks that they would find on their conquests, and they would bring them back to Europe and put them in sideshows, sort of trot them out as freaks, things like that. So here's an example. This is a Canadian Inuit family that was captured by French sailors in 1566, and they were brought to Antwerp in Belgium, where they were put on display in 1567 for money at a local tavern. So this is a contemporary of the time handbill, sort of advertising that. This is another example of someone. This is Prince Giolo. Was purchased in India by someone named William Dampier in 1691, and was brought back to England so that Dampier could charge people to look at him. So this history of sort of European colonialism clashing with indigenous cultures is really long. But Europe itself did not have a strong history of tattoo practices between sort of Otzi the Iceman and maybe 200 years ago. There's some examples of crusaders getting pilgrimage tattoos on their way to the Holy Land to sort of document and celebrate that conquest, I suppose we'll use. The Crusaders were not particularly gentle or diplomatic folks on their journeys east. And so they would get these tattoos to sort of commemorate those trips. Within Scandinavia, however, there is we always get the question, like, did the Vikings have tattoos? The short answer is we don't know. There was an Islamic sort of traveler, sort of like an Islamic Marco Polo, I suppose, who ran into a group of Scandinavian they called them Scandinavian Rus tribe in I think what is now Russia, but described them as sort of being decorated head to toe in bluish, greenish, ornately sort of designed, their skin was ornately designed. Now, whether or not those were tattoos or whether or not they were just sort of, the pigment was painted on the skin, we don't know, because we don't have bodies from this time period. So it's really only when we find bog bodies or bodies hidden in glaciers that have tattoos that we're able to sort of document the actual tattoo practices of the ancient world. But certainly the Vikings traveled around a lot. They were sort of known for their trading practices. They were known for their sort of long voyages, long travels. But between that time period and say 150 years ago, there's not a lot of history, or there's not a lot of evidence in the historical record that people were getting tattooed in Scandinavia. Certainly in the 1890s, tattooing really sort of took off as a part of a rich sailing tradition in Scandinavia. So sailors from Norway, sailors from Denmark and Sweden were certainly traveling around the world. They were certainly encountering other people with tattoos. So it's probably reasonable to assume that lots of those sailors would have gotten tattoos as well. Interestingly enough, I think the oldest continually operating tattoo parlor in the world is actually in Copenhagen. It's changed hands several times, but it's been in operation for I think over 120 years. So there's been kind of a continuous presence for tattooing in Denmark, at least, and in Norway for the last 120 years or so. One of the people that we're really excited to feature in this exhibit is a man named Amund Dietzel. So here's a portrait of Dietzel taken around probably 1915 or so. And Dietzel was a sailor by trade. He set off, he was a Norwegian, born in Norway, and joined kind of the merchant marines, I suppose, of Norway in that time, and traveled around the world. He ended up being shipwrecked in Canada, and on his voyages back and forth from Norway to North America, he sort of learned how to do tattooing. He would give tattoos to his fellow sailors, and so when he ended up shipwrecked in Canada, he went to the logging camps on the eastern side of Canada and sort of did tattooing for the loggers that were working there. He eventually made it to Milwaukee in around 1917, I believe, and opened up a tattoo shop and ended up becoming one of the most important tattoo artists of the early 20th century. He was called the Master in Milwaukee, and some of his designs are sort of still popular today. So we do have some pieces of flash art. So flash art is designs that a tattoo artist makes that a client, when they come into the shop, they can sort of say, I really want a swallow on a branch, so I'm going to choose this piece. And the tattoo artist will take a look at that, and then they'll decide where they're going to put it on their body and do the tattoo. So it's not custom tattooing. So historically, that tended to be the way tattoos were done. Although today, much more work is actually custom designed. So you come into your tattoo studio, and you find a tattoo artist whose work you like, and you work together with them to come up with a design that you think is really meaningful. So this is an example of a tattoo machine that Dietzel would have used. So the tattoo machine, the electric tattoo machine, was invented by Samuel O'Reilly in 1891. And it's actually sort of based on an electric pencil design, or electric pen design that Thomas Edison invented. So basically the way it works is there are two coils in it that create a sort of electromagnetic field, and it pulls down a bar, which then breaks the field and collapses the circuit, and a spring pushes it back up. So this happens hundreds and hundreds of times per second, which sends that needle up and down and up and down. So it allowed tattoo artists to do tattoos much quicker. The tattoos ended up looking a lot cleaner, I suppose is a way to describe it, than the traditional hand-tapped tattoos. But there is a continuing tradition of hand tapping today. So this silicone arm and the silicone arm at the beginning of the gallery were both designed and hand tapped by tattoo artists working in Scandinavia today. This one was done by Colin Dale, who works at Skin and Bone Tattoo, and it features a very traditional kind of Viking era sort of design. So we commissioned two of these tattoo sleeves to get made for us for this exhibit. They had a little bit of trouble tattooing. It was a lot of work to hand tap the silicone sleeve. So, did you know that the King of Denmark actually had tattoos in the 1940s? So here's a photo of King Frederick IX of Denmark with his tattoos. He was a sailor, and so sort of part of that tradition, he would get tattoos. One of the really interesting things that we're kind of exhibit as we talk about identity is the ways in which tattoos can sort of communicate lots and lots of different things about people. So in the last 100 years, I suppose we'll say, there's been a long history of white supremacist groups using images from the medieval Scandinavian time period, what a pure white medieval Europe would look like, and to use those symbols as a way to communicate their desire to return to that. There's lots of issues, obviously, with that. First off, it's historically very accurate. The medieval time period in Europe was incredibly diverse, and so it's sort of they missed the historical accuracy on that front. But it also leaves us with a lot of issues as we think about the revival of a sort of neo-Nordic tattoo style. How do we differentiate between the person who gets a Thor's hammer tattoo because they are really proud of their sort of Scandinavian ancestry, Scandinavian background, and the white supremacist who gets the Thor's hammer tattoo because they see it as a way to sort of fly below the radar of the general population, but still communicate their sort of, I don't know, disgusting beliefs about white supremacy. So we get into that a little bit in the exhibit. We just had a lecture that sort of dove into it in far more detail. But it's a really tricky, really complicated issue, and so we're not excited to be exploring that. We feel like it's essential for us to sort of talk about that and address it. If you're just joining in, my name is Zach Rauheiveld. I'm the exhibits manager here at Vesterheim. We're doing a live tour of the tattoo exhibit. So if you have any questions, feel free to sort of post them and we'll get to them when they come in. So we're moving from sort of Europe into North America in this section of the exhibit. So like indigenous groups all over the world, the indigenous groups in North America also had a long history of tattoo practices. So we have some photos here of contemporary Native Americans, and we have some drawings of sort of historic examples of Native American tattoos as well. So there's lots of different styles and designs that are sort of coming out in those for these different indigenous groups. Obviously, Native Americans is not a single people group. There are thousands and thousands of different cultures that exist in that, and each one has kind of different designs and different aesthetics and different reasons why they get tattoos. I think some of the most interesting tattooing that's happening right now is in among indigenous people in Alaska. So there's been several examples of Native women who are getting tattooed, especially the face tattoos, like you see here, as ways for them to sort of establish their Native identity, that they, for all intents and purposes, could pass as white Caucasian Americans, and they want to make sure that that doesn't happen anymore, that they want to be clear that they are part of a native group, and so they get these face tattoos and tattoos on their arms as well, as kind of a way to very publicly show that they are native. So it's this really interesting kind of history there, where you have a long tradition of tattoo practices, and then a decline of those tattoo practices as a result of interaction with either Christian missionaries or American colonial power through the military or other sort of governmental entities. So you have a decline in tattoo practices, a decline in people who can give these tattoos, and now we're seeing sort of a revival of those traditions. So I think it's really important that we think about these things not as something that existed in the past, right? These are continuing traditions. These are continual practices. So tattooing in America, when we think about tattooing in America, there are a couple different time periods to sort of think about. In the early time period, sort of in the mid to late 1800s, tattooing primarily existed on the sideshow. It was something that sort of the freaks at circuses would do. There'd be a way that was a way for tattoo artists to kind of make ends meet. So they would travel with the circus. That's what Dietzel did. Ahmed Dietzel. He traveled with the circuses to and served as sort of a tattooed man in the sideshow. And he would also sort of get business as a result of doing that. So he would tattoo on the side, appear in the sideshow, sort of as his day job. Certainly, there's a rich tradition of sailor tattoos as well. Herman Melville, who wrote Moby Dick, among other novels, talks a lot about the tattoo designs that people would have. You know, often people would have "Hold Fast" tattooed on each knuckle of their hand. And so it would sort of, the sailors would believe that it would protect them should the ship capsize or sink or something. They would maybe tattoo a rooster or a pig as a way to protect themselves if they went overboard. So pigs and roosters would be placed on feet to avoid drowning, because these pigs and roosters on the boats would be packed inside wooden crates, and so if there was a shipwreck, those animals would often be the ones that survived. There's lots of other sort of traditions for sailor and maritime tattoos. Swallows represent 5,000 nautical miles sailed. A rigged ship would often be you'd have to round I'm blanking on the name of the region, but you'd have to go through the Strait of Magellan in order to get the rigged ship tattoo. So these maritime traditions often had great influence on their tattoo designs that they were choosing. So we have some photos of historic sort of tattoo artists and people who appeared in the sideshows. You can kind of see all of the different. They almost look like they're covered in wallpaper. That's how densely packed all of these designs are. And they're not necessarily one cohesive bodysuit in the way that people who are getting tattooed in the Japanese traditional style would often have. You know, in the Japanese traditional style, you would have basically one entire scene depicted on the back of your back. Whereas this American traditional, it's lots of little sort of icons that get pieced together into one kind of cohesive design. So from the sailors and sideshows, we kind of get into what we tend to think of when we think of tattoos historically, and that is gangs and bikers and American GIs from the sort of 1940s to the 1970s. So here we have an example of Bert Grimm tattooing a former sailor in 1955. Here we have some Hell's Angels who have tattoos that sort of mark them as separate from society. it's in this time period too that some of the really most recognizable American tattoo styles really come into being. The Chicano communities of East LA develop a black and gray style, using really fine lines and single needle tools. So these tattoo styles kind of are coming out of the prison systems in LA and in California in the 60s and 70s. But as a result of that, they sort of have this, at least in that time period, they had this kind of reputation of being only something that gang members would have. Now today, the fine line black and gray style is one of the most popular tattoo styles you can get. But in the 60s and 70s, it really marked you as someone who was kind of separate from society. You were either a member of a gang or you served time. So the transition from this kind of historic time period where you're sort of set apart from society to today, where almost everybody having a tattoo today doesn't mark you as one kind of person anymore. Your doctor might have a tattoo, your lawyer could have a tattoo. It's not just artists and people who are sort of seen as rebellious that have tattoos. It's kind of everybody. So one of the reasons why tattoos have kind of become so popular today is that they're just so much more visible as a result of MTV going live in the 1980s and tattoo reality TV shows like Miami Ink and other things really kind of elevated tattoos visibility. And so the more people see tattoos, the more it sort of gets, it's no longer something that is only done by certain people. So, so there's tons and tons and tons of different tattoo styles that exist today. Almost every tattoo artist working today has an incredibly active Instagram account. So if you're thinking about getting a tattoo, that's probably the place to start, is to find an artist whose work you really like. Here's kind of a smorgasbord of different tattoo styles that exist today. So there's everything from photorealistic black and gray tattoo styles to really high color floral work. Here's an example of kind of a traditional Japanese style and geometric dot works. So one of the things that we're doing with this exhibit is we're having a series of tattoo talks. And coming up November 24th, we're actually going to be talking about the future of tattoos. So there's a researcher named Carson Bruns who works at the University of Colorado Boulder, and he's developing tattoo inks that respond to the world around us. Because tattoo pigments, tattoo inks haven't changed that much in the 5,000 years that we've been tattooing ourselves. And so what Carson is doing is he's developing tattoo inks that can respond to UV light. So you can know if you need to reapply sunscreen. He calls them solar freckles. We also can't tell when we have fevers, and so he's developed some tattoo inks that can kind of that change color depending on how hot or cold you are. That lecture is on November 24th. If you're in Decorah, we'd certainly encourage you to come down. We're really excited about it, sort of to think about what the future holds for body modification and for tattoo practices. This is our working tattoo studio. So today, Erica Bessler, who works at Brock's Tattoo here in Decorah, is doing drop-in tattoos. And this has been incredibly popular at the museum. Since the exhibit opened on June 1st, we've had over 45 people get tattoos in the gallery. So this morning we had enough space for about 12 or 13 people to get tattoos, and those slots filled up in about 15 minutes. So this has been incredibly popular. So right now, this space is it is a working tattoo studio, so we won't spend too much time in it. But the last sort of section of the tattoos that we want to talk about is kind of a little bit about tattoo regret. certainly getting a tattoo is a permanent change to your body, and there's percent of people who have tattoos do not regret the decision to get them. For the people that do regret those tattoos, it often comes down to a couple of different factors. One, they were too young when they got the tattoo, or they didn't spend enough time thinking about the design and the decision to get it. One of the other reasons is maybe they got the name of somebody that they were in a relationship with, and they're no longer in that relationship anymore. Or if it's poorly done or doesn't look professional, oftentimes people's first tattoos, maybe they don't have a lot of money, and so they don't want to sort of spend hundreds of dollars that it can cost from a really high caliber tattoo artist. So while a vast majority of people don't regret their tattoos, there are certainly people that do. And for those folks, there's a couple of different options that they can explore. Laser tattoo removal is a booming business in America and sort of in the world. That's often a recommendation that lots of people have is to, if you don't like a tattoo, get it lasered off. It's sort of the best way to go about undoing a decision you're not particularly happy with. Another really popular way of dealing with tattoos that you're not such a big fan of anymore is to do a cover-up. And so what that is you have a tattoo that, in this example, you have a carrot tattoo that somebody decided to get at some point. And they did a couple of rounds of laser treatment, and then they covered it up with another tattoo design. So it's a way to sort of take something that you're not a big fan of anymore and make it more meaningful for yourself. We also have a couple of examples of other tattoo tools around the world. So here's an example of a contemporary tattoo machine. It's kind of what you think of when you think of tattoo machines. It's bright, it's shiny, it makes a loud buzzing sound. But in this case, there are also other examples of ways in which people give tattoos. For some indigenous communities, especially in Canada and in northern sort of Alaska area, they do something called skin stitching, where they take a needle and a short piece of thread, and they dip the thread in ink, and then they stitch. They pull they put the needle through the skin and pull it through, and the thread deposits the ink in the skin behind it. And so it's a really laborious process. But it's one of many ways that indigenous groups are giving tattoos. We also have, in this case, some bone tattoo tools that probably would have been used a really long time ago by Native American and other native groups. We talk a lot about hand tapping tattoo tools. Here's an example of a contemporary hand tapping tattoo tool. So this one has contemporary tattoo needles, but it's a very traditional design. And so it's a tool that would be that the tattoo artist would use to sort of he or she would dip the needles into the tattoo ink, and then tap that into the skin using another stick or another tool. I don't know if we have any questions that people have, but thank you so much for joining us today. This was our first foray into live video here on Facebook, so thanks so much for joining us. We're so glad that you were able to participate. Again, we want to thank our sponsors of the Tattoo Identity Through Ink exhibit, Nick and Courtney Rowley, Brock's Valhalla Tattoo, and Toppling Goliath Brewing Company. Keep an eye on our social media accounts for upcoming events related to the tattoo exhibit. Maybe you're interested in signing up for one of our drop-in tattoo sessions, or you want to come to one of our tattoo talks. Keep an eye on our website and on our social media accounts for those things coming up. Again, my name is Zach Rauheiveld. I'm the exhibits manager. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope you all had fun, learned a little bit, got a chance to see the exhibit. And we'll make your way down to the museum to check it out in person. We only kind of scratched the surface of what's on display here. So Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.